Thanks for stopping by Big Top Gaming. My name's Brian, and no, you haven't tripped over a tactics board and landed into a BuzzFeed article. Based on a viewer comment, I'm going to be trying to rank the top 5 point units in A Song of Ice and Fire. And I will give some comments on some of the ones that didn't make the list and how to kind of bump them up a little bit, and that might be all of the 5 point units. I'm not quite sure yet, but we'll get there. I did want to establish some kind of ground rules or kind of the metrics that I'm using to judge these. I think that in order to compare units, you need to kind of forget that the tactics cards for the factions or commanders or attachments exist. I really just want to look at the raw stats of the units, their output, and their special rules they have attached to them. There might be a little bit of interaction with the concept of tactics cards, but in general, we're really trying to give all the units the biggest fair shot, or the best fair shot, I guess, that they have. And to do that, I really need to ignore a lot of the things that happened around them. Anchoring the spot at number 5, we're looking at the Lannister Guardsmen, the original terror of the Iron Kingdoms. For 5 points, you get something that's got a 3+ save, which is great. It's a low point investment for something that's difficult to get rid of. A 7+ morale is really average, but in my opinion, I think that 7 or average is kind of rough in the game. I think when you get to 6 is where things start to feel a little bit more comfortable. Speed 4 is really holding these guys down along with their morale. They're fast enough to get to objectives, but not fast enough to be extremely flexible on the battlefield. Now, their attack stat is not the greatest either. They hit on 4s, so average like 50-ish% of their hits are going to connect. And when you look at the attacks they bring, we're not going to be doing a ton of damage with this unit. Maybe when they charge, we might get some decent hits in. But one of the other things to pay attention to is that their decay rate is not so bad. 6 to 5 to 3 is pretty decent in terms of sustainability. The big benefit for the Lannister Guardsmen come from Lannister supremacy, and this is where they're likely to get most of their damage done, especially with the new, in quotes, panic rules that have been around. These guys can do quite a bit of work to units that even have a decent morale. So we're looking at taking those 6s into 8s, which is not great, and anything under that you just are almost doomed to failure. So a lot of their damage occurs outside of their combat phase, but they're a good, strong unit that can anchor down some key zones for you. But when you're talking about trying to dig deep and utilize some of the tools that you have at your disposal, the Lannister Guardsmen are probably not going to be that utility for you. In the number 4 spot, we have the often overlooked Kraken Trackers. When you look at their stats, they're not super great. We're looking at a 6+ save and a 7+ morale. Those are not the greatest numbers in the universe to have for those, but they do have a 6 speed, and that's big for a 5-point unit, cheap and quick, and can get into really annoying places. When we start looking at their attacks, they've got a little bit of diversity here with having a short-ranged attack and a melee attack. They're both hitting on 4s, and their melee attack isn't putting up a lot of numbers other than they don't decay very fast. They go from 6 to 5 to 3. But when we look at their ranged attack, that's where we're getting the bulk of our work done with this unit. They shoot 8 dice, then they decay down to 6, which isn't so bad when you look at how much you're actually throwing with that. And then 4 on the end is not super great, but it's still enough to be impactful. The big selling point for this unit, though, is the order quickfire. With a unit this fast, and having access to the maneuver position on the tactics board, you can see moving up your 6 inches, then shifting 2 and shooting, and then once you actually take your real activation, you could just shift 2 and shoot again. These guys are great at getting into the sides of units and starting to pick them off with the -1 armor penalty that they end up imposing, and they're kind of the unit that your opponent doesn't want to commit the resources to go after, because even with a 6+ armor save, we've got the 7+ morale that's going to possibly make it difficult for our opponent to one-round them, and then they've just got to spend all this time taking out a piddly unit. The unfortunate thing is these guys are worth points, and that's what kind of keeps them where they are on my list. In spot number 3, we have the extremely ferocious House Bolton Cutthroats. Now, this unit has a little bit better or a little bit better defensive stats than the Crannogmen do. They've got the 5+ save instead of the 6+, so they're not really kicking in any more survivability points there, and their speed does go down to 5, which seems to kind of be the regular average for most combat units that aren't cavalry in this game. Their attack stat is really good and really aggressive. They hit on 3s, so when they're charging, they're going to be hitting most of their attacks, and even when they're engaged, they're still likely to hit about 5 or 6 of these on average, right? But this unit has other selling points. One of the big ones being Vicious, which I think is a really phenomenal and strong ability right now. Panic saves are quite impactful, much more than they were before, because with the way Panic used to work, right? I mean, it was the low morale units just get picked on more, and the high morale units don't really have to worry so much. But nowadays, that neg2 can take a unit that was in that good morale position and not have to worry so much about losing just a couple guys here and there to having to lose like 3 to 4 units or 3 to 4 models after one attack. The House Bolton Cutthroats also kind of dictate a little bit of your opponent's activation with the Spiked Mace ability, or the other half of the Spiked Mace ability, which just says if they attack a unit that has not yet activated, they become vulnerable, and that just kicks up the damage output of this unit even more. Stacking vulnerable with Vicious and a massive attack stat with really accurate hitting makes them a glass cannon unit that people will have to respect on the table. In the number 2 spot, we have the Baratheon Wardens. Now, this unit is a big contributor to my interest in this faction right now, but we have these guys looking a lot like the Lannister Guardsmen, so what puts them up so much higher? They've still got the speed 4, they have a 3+ save, but now we've kind of tipped those scales into a good morale stat with a 6+. We're still only hitting on 4s, and the attack stat isn't that much different in terms of the decay than the Guardsmen were, but throwing 7 dice at first and then 5 is not a terrible place to be. The Baratheon Wardens end up coming with the Warhammer ability attached to their melee, which just says if the defender rolls a 1 on any of their defense saves, they become weakened. Not only does this contribute to the extreme survivability of this unit, but they also have the target opening ability, and that allows the unit to expend weakened tokens on defenders as though they were vulnerable tokens. So this unit is going to be jammed in with the opponent for a while, so the chances of you stacking any of these tokens on them to be able to utilize them as vulnerable will help them take their kind of mediocre stat line and turn it into a pretty dangerous attack swing. Also taking anything from the tactics board to get these tokens out in order to kickstart that process is going to be good for them. And healing any 3+ unit is also going to just make this one much more frustrating and annoying. The speed 4 thing is one of the issues holding them back when we look at the metrics or the parameters that I've decided to look at these units in. But the Baratheon Wardens bring a lot of versatility and survivability. They defend well, they attack well. They're just an overall great unit, and only just a hair or 2 away from taking the top 1 spot from the next unit we're going to be talking about. If you are a regular viewer of the channel, my number 1 spot will not surprise you. I still firmly believe that Stark Sworn Swords are the best 5-point unit in the game. When we look at what they bring, they've got a great defensive stat line. A 4+ is middle of the road, 6+ is on the better side of the middle of the road, and their speed is 5, so they're really falling in that average. They hit on 4s, which isn't great, but also is deceiving, but their attack stat is phenomenal. They throw 8 dice on full ranks, then only go down to 6 on second and only 5 on their last rank. To have a unit throw that much dice on their last rank makes them extremely aggressive till the bitter end. The other big selling point for the Stark Sworn Swords is their Stark Fury ability. This allows them to turn that 4+ to hit into a 3+, which is good whether you're charging or just being stuck in combat. It also increases their output by giving them critical blow. So with the Stark, if they're swinging at full dice or full ranks, they're going to be on average getting 2 extra hits out of that critical blow ability. And with rerolls, the math gets a little funky to where it kind of turns into 3 or 4 extra hits on average, although that's just living an average world, which really doesn't exist. The downside of this is that they do take D3 wounds after the activation's completed or after the attack's been completed. But if they have 1 remaining rank, you don't suffer any wounds, so you're at least looking at roughly getting 1 extra hit out of critical blow on your final rank and not taking any penalty for it. Everything that the Stark Sworn Swords bring is efficient. They have great saves, they attack well, and the other big deal is they don't confuse any of your tactics. I know I said that I wasn't going to talk about tactics so much in this one, but this is more the mechanic of tactics and triggers. Stark Fury is not an order, so it's not going to share any triggers with any of the cards that any Stark player might be trying to play, or any order that they might be trying to use. So the Stark Sworn Swords just have tons of synergy in making sure they put out as much oppressive combat pressure as they can, and if they need to exist in a space and just endure, they have the stats that allow them to do it, and that really keeps the Stark Sworn Swords in that high 1 position way above everything else, except for they might be holding hands with Baratheon Wardens a little bit. Although I think it's really difficult to find anything else outside of that that comes close to the efficiency and value that you get from this Stark Sworn Sword unit. I wanted to make one honorable mention spot because I think this is one that people would talk about the most as being missing from the list. But the Poor Fellows, I think, they're a fantastic unit. I enjoy using them when I use them. But the thing that keeps them off this list is that they only really find their home in faith-based lists, and there is one rule that I think is sorely missing from their card, and that is insignificant. A cheap 5-point unit like this that has such a low armor save and is really susceptible to being one-shotted without the help from any tactics cards or anything like that is just a little bit too much of a liability, which is kind of the reason why you only really see these in faith-based builds, because the Sparrow can really lean into what they do and kind of fix some of their problems. But outside of that, they really don't have a place. And I think if they just got insignificant, it might make it so that you would see these kind of taking the place of some Lannister Guardsmen, especially if you're not going to pay, you don't have the points to grab that 1-point attachment and are really worried about that 7+ morale dragging them down. So that's where I feel like the Poor Fellows sit, and that I will continue to think that insignificant is just something that is sorely missing from their card. The only issue with putting that spell or that rule on here is that it just makes the High Sparrow that much better, and I don't think that needs to happen either. For the out to pasture position, this kind of encapsulates, it's a funny way of me just saying that there's their unit that I feel like is kind of on the shelf. And oh, how the mighty have fallen. The Cave Dweller Savages used to be one of the best units in Free Folk, and now they've gone to almost one of the worst. And the thing that's happening here, if you take a look at the Stag Knight nobles as well, or not Stag Knight nobles, but the Stag Knights from Baratheons, they kind of have the same problem. They've got a lot of these rules that are stacking up, and the Cave Dweller Savages at least used to be able to pick one of those rules at the beginning for their ruthless savagery. Now they can't, so they just kind of run around as this 5-point unit that is a little bit more of a premium in Free Folk, and they have to go into things after someone else has gone into them, even though this unit is faster. They also have a great morale stat, so they can kind of hang out in, they can kind of be your alpha punch and not have to worry about getting wiped out right away. So the other thing about the Cave Dweller Savages is that they kind of, it's not that they're bad or that they don't have a space in Free Folk. They do. It's just that that space isn't something that I think Free Folk really wants them for. The Cave Dweller Savages are supposed to be closers. Like the Raiders go in, do some damage, and then the Cave Dweller Savages get to turn on Ruthless Savagery, hopefully, and go and close the deal and destroy the unit they're engaged with. The issue with that, though, is that for 1 point more, you just get 2 more units of Free Folk Raiders, and they are better closers than Cave Dweller Savages are anyways. And you don't even need to close the deal anymore with Free Folk. It's almost like you just kind of keep them in a place or take up a spot or sit on an objective. The Cave Dweller Savages just don't feel like the job that they have is really open for hiring in Free Folk. So do I think there's a way to fix the Cave Dweller Savages? Honestly, with the way that the Free Folk builds have been evolving, I think that just giving them their old version back, or even just giving them the ability to choose a Ruthless Savagery thing right off the top, would make them fine. I don't think it would change Free Folk builds all that much, and it wouldn't make the Cave Dweller Savages a terror. I do feel like this change, although maybe a little bit foretold, was not extremely needed for Free Folk considering what their builds are evolving into. The too rich for my blood spot is a little weird, right? We're looking at Dothraki Outriders, but by the name of this category, you can tell that I think that this unit really should be 5 points. When you're looking at the Targaryens in general, it is the faction I have the least experience playing. Not that I don't have any, but just the least. And it is also the youngest faction in the game right now, so some of their releases are a little bit behind, kind of making their power level look a little lower than what it actually should be. But I think it's quite universal that among most players that Dothraki Outriders just don't seem to make it along in Targaryen lists. Their tactics cards don't synergize well with just a shooting unit, especially when we start looking at their commanders, and the output that the Dothraki Outriders bring doesn't seem to really match a 6-point unit. I mean, they've got a decent attack stat, they hit well, but they're with no rerolls ever. You're not really going to be hitting all that often and doing a ton of damage. These guys just don't feel that impactful. Now, with speed 6 on cavalry, you are likely to get into the side, especially with having nimble, so you could be looking at getting those 7 shots at sundering. But when we compare these to something like the Ranger Hunters from Night's Watch. Now, I know that comparing cross-faction is a problem and you really shouldn't do it, but for the same point level, we're getting a really different-looking unit and something that's a lot more attractive at that point level. Now, if the Dothraki Outriders were 5 points, it might free up some points in the Dothraki, or not Dothraki, but the Targaryen list build that might make some other options more viable. Like right now, the NCUs get kind of weird with having such expensive units, and when I compare Outriders to Screamers, typically I'm just going to be taking Screamers all the time because they are the ones who synergize the most with what the Targaryens are doing anyways. So for Outriders, I do feel like they should hit that 5-point level. And for what I'm pretty sure is the last 5-point option to touch on in the game is the Goldilocks spot. So for this one, this is just right. Perfect unit, no problems with the way that it's designed. I think the Stormcrow mercenaries really hit that. They didn't make the list, but I think it's only because it's difficult to talk about them with the adaptive ability and motivated by coin. There's a lot of factors that change the way they work for you and how you apply them to the game, but they have pretty decent stat line. They're quite aggressive. They could hit a little bit better, but other than that, I feel like there's nothing that really needs to be changed with this unit. I think it's just fine the way it is. So that was my first top 5 list. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know in the comments below. That'll get me to make more of these and try and do some other top 5 lists out there. That'd be fun. If your top 5 list for 5-point units ends up differing a little bit, let me know what those are in the comments below as well. There's a lot of fluidity in how you build these lists. For me, it's a lot more centered around the way that I approach the game, what I find valuable in a unit, and where I like to how I like to apply my units. Really, depending on your skill level or your personal preferences in play, you could have a completely different one. Even if you think that Stark Sworn Swords are trash, but I don't think so. We had a list locally that terrorized for a while that I think had 6 or 7 Sworn Swords with Howlin' Reed in it. It was just vomit everywhere. It was bad. I think it was like 10 or 11 activations, maybe 12. It was just gross. I haven't seen it in a long time, but that list was nasty, and Sworn Swords are disgusting. Not so much disgusting, they're just probably still really great for what they are. Not broken, just really, really good. I hope you enjoyed this list, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video, whether that's another top 5 list, or we'll get back to this list discussion. I know I've got more Targaryen stuff to talk about, and it seems like I've got to start working around with Alistair Thorne, who I have messed with a little bit, just not enough to really develop anything, but that's where I'm at. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.